Hey there, welcome to First Look, and it's good to be back. I've been off for a couple weeks, but am glad to be back in the rotation and with you again. And it was wonderful to see everyone on Sunday. So we are just kind of pivoting and getting right into this series that we're doing on Esther. So if you were with us on Sunday, or if you caught the service afterwards, what we did was kind of give you an introduction into what all of this would be like and what we were focusing on and how we were doing things and that kind of thing. So on Sunday, we covered sort of the beginning of the story to give you an idea of where we head. And we did that by focusing on Queen Vashti. And Queen Vashti is someone who I think I certainly have overlooked. Whenever I think about Esther, I usually quickly get to the parts that talk about Esther specifically, her journey, her story, her family dynamics, that kind of thing. But as I was looking through and thinking about how I wanted to approach this series and this book, I realized that I wanted to kind of take a more comprehensive look at who is influential in the book. And she seemed like a natural person to begin with because it's really her heroic actions and her story that sets everything up for what happens afterwards. So, just as a quick recap for her, she was the queen. She was asked to do something. The king had a huge party, asked her to come in to just sort of be on display because she was beautiful and she wanted his intoxicated friends to just oogle at her for a while, and she refused. And for that, a couple of things happen. One, he gets rid of her as queen, and the second thing is that they put a law together that basically that women have to obey their husbands and everything, right? So there was this. She dared to speak up about something that had to do with just her own sensibilities and sense of justice, and those in authority cracked down on making sure that nothing like that would happen again. And so it sets up the rest of the book in a couple of different ways. One, I think it sets the tone for the kind of equity and justice and equality that I think the looking out for the least of these that the book is really centered on. But then it also sets up the type of decision making and heroism that you're going to see throughout the book. And so we'll have a few weeks of this, and some of the stories will focus on Esther specifically, but other ones won't. And so Vashti becomes this example of someone who is willing to put everything on the line for for what she believes is right, and that kind of sets the stage then later for what Esther does. So we went through that, and we kind of give you an idea and a reminder of where we are in the greater story. That the people of Israel are in exile, and that the Babylonians have been taken over by the Persians, and the Persians would eventually be those who allow Israel to return to build Jerusalem. And so that's all important to know as we kind of get into the book. So this next story of week number 2 is kind of the main story that we usually get to when we talk about Esther. If you've heard sermons or you've seen the book used in any kind of way, the story that we cover here this week is probably the one that you know the best. So this is the story of Esther speaking up for Israel. So I'll have to give you a little bit of background before we get into the actual story. So there's some players that you should know as we pivot into this part of the story. So after Vashti is asked to leave, they kind of have an open tryout for queen. And so they bring in very kind of Cinderella-esque. And so they have all these people come in, all these women come in to sort of audition to be queen. And eventually they get to, Esther is brought before the king, and the king is like, oh, she's it. Doesn't know that she is from Israel, just knows that this is a woman that he would want to be the queen. So she's groomed and everything is kind of, put together, and she becomes queen and all of that. Along the way, you have this kind of assistant to the king whose name is Haman. And Haman really wants power and control. And through a series of events, sees an opportunity to exert that control and that power by getting rid of the people of Israel. He's felt insulted by them and not respected, and that the people are not listening to the king and to the desires of the empire, and makes a plan through manipulation of the king to get rid of Israel, who again are subjects to Persia. So the uncle of Esther, whose name is Mordecai gets wind of what's happening and is able to get a message to Esther, able to speak with her. And so he wants him to say, look, you need to be the one. If this is going to not happen, if we're not going to all be just eradicated here, it's going to be because you do something. And so she is encouraged by Mordecai to say something, which is where we are in the story. And that's where that famous phrase, you were made queen for such a time as this, is happens. So I'm going to read that part of the story for us, and then we'll kind of talk about it. But that's where we are in terms of the plot. All right. So let me get to there. Okay. Whoops. Here we are. Of course, it booted me out of the wrong book, so give me 1 second. So this is Esther chapter 4, verses 1 through 17. Okay. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, meaning, again, he's the uncle of Esther and had learned this plot, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, the one that would eradicate the Jews eventually, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend to her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. Clearly, she had been isolated from all of this, because in the king's mind, none of this would have anything to do with her, because he didn't know of her background. And so, a legal matter like this one with some group of people who were, who were being subject to the empire, you would think wouldn't have much to do with the queen. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susha, to show to Esther and to explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and to plead for him for her people. Okay. So Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Let me pause there for a second. Hathach, being a eunuch and being the person that he is fascinating to me, because he, of course, is not only subject to the queen, right, a servant of the queen in her best interests, but ultimately, of course, to the best interests of the king. Now, the king and the queen, obviously, their staffs aren't the same, but the fact that this man who was hearing Mordecai was not only willing to have a meeting with him, which I'm sure if the wrong person got wind of that would be bad news for him. It really wasn't in the best interest of the empire or of the queen for him to hear this out. Like, it's not, this was an edict that was brought out by the king. He's hearing someone who's trying to oppose that. He works for the crown. Like, none of that really makes any sense, at least in terms of his role. Now he is supposed to be someone who would do the bidding of the queen, obviously, but this is the queen and her staff and her office is ultimately obviously subject to the king. So all of this is dangerous. Okay. So Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they will be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I have been called to go to the king. So clearly this is not, they don't have a daily meeting. There's a separation between her and him. And the stating the clear rules that are there. And the details of that probably aren't as important to us as readers, but there's some of those details about like what the rule is and how it's applied, are all kind of in there. But ultimately she recognizes that her not waiting to be summoned, given all the things that have happened before her, puts her in a lot of distress. She knows that the king is not above disciplining the person who holds the office of queen. And she knows, of course, that she has been hiding her ethnicity this whole time. And so her speaking up about this is really there's no going back situation. The king is either going to accept it, which you would imagine has not been his track record, or he's going to reject her, and that will be the end of not only her people but also of her. Right? There's a self-preservation element to this. Let's see here. So when this is verse 12. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. If you remain silent, At this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go and gather together all the Jews who are in Susha, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. So I'll get to the "for such a time as this" piece in a second. But what I wanted to kind of pass, or when I was kind of sort of was thinking about, was the fact that as she's doing this, she moves into this kind of worshipful stance. She asked the Jews in that city to do the same kind of worshipful experience that she's going to do, and she does the same. And fasting is, I think, an interesting, I think we kind of understand the purpose of fasting, but it's an interesting kind of practice, especially leading up to such a monumental kind of decision. And I thought it was interesting that that's the tact that she takes. She doesn't say, "I'm just going to go and pray about it." She says, "I'm going to take these worshipful actions." And the thing about fasting, if I understand the practice of it, and I'm not in the practice of fasting for any faith reason, is that it puts you into a state where you're forced to focus on something, or to recognize something in your body that is happening, that isn't being addressed. And so thus you can't really focus on anything else. But if you're focused on how you're feeling, physically feeling, then it forces you to put all of your energy to kind of distract you from that into the thing that you're fasting for. And I find that practice fascinating. And I'm not really sure why. And, we have, like, with all the dietary stuff that is around us, and, so much food around us, but food scarcity for others, and, like, I think food and hunger and poverty and everything kind of gets mixed into that. But the idea that a person would forego food in order to focus their energy on something so they weren't distracted by other things is a fascinating kind of religious practice. And so that's the state that she puts herself in, that she wants to be able to make sure that she isn't distracted by anything else. Because in her position, she could lean on, or get distracted by, or be prone to only kind of focus on the things that are comfortable. Because, obviously she lived the most comfortable kind of lifestyle that a person could live at the time. And putting herself into a state of hunger was the closest thing I think that she could probably do to creating a desperate situation for herself physically. And so she prepares herself for this event of talking with the king and seeing how it would go. And, it's interesting to think about Mordecai's words, how carefully he put them together, obviously, and then um, passes them along to the eunuch, who then gives it to her. You wonder then, and I could look it up. Maybe there's some clue. This eunuch, Hathach, I think his name was, who is the one who's sort of being the go-between, what his story is, because his story becomes almost as important as Esther's story and as Mordecai's story. Because again, he could have stopped all of this, right? This only happens because he sees it as in the best interest of everyone to stop this. Now, maybe he knows that the empire, it's not in the empire's best interest to be annihilating whole groups of people. That's not the empire that they are. Maybe he's been a part of an ethnic group where this has happened to him, or to other people that he's seen. Who knows what Hathach has seen in his time working for the kingdom. And so it's in his part in this whole story is interesting. And Mordecai does, I think, what any of us would imagine that we would do, especially if we were the uncle, the family of someone in such a powerful position. We would say, look, you are in this spot. You have voice where no one else here has voice. You have the opportunity to do something that no one in your kingdom has the opportunity to do. You are there in that spot for, if you would have said who you were originally, you probably wouldn't be in that spot to begin with. You're there. And you need to step into this. This has to be what you do. And I think the most fascinating part of the speech is, look, if you don't, he's saying it more as an uncle than he is as an Israelite. Because he says, look, if you don't help us, God will find another way. If you don't do this, God will find another way. But this will haunt you. This will be the death of you if you don't do this. So don't think that you're saving yourself by not doing this, because something will happen to you. God will do this thing for Israel. You will not be spared. So there's a confidence in a faith by Mordecai to say, the God that I know will send us away. God has always sent us away. But I believe that you are in the position to do this. And so he speaks to her more as an uncle, which I think is interesting. And then there's that famous line, which is how I'll end. For such a time as this. And it's the kind of phrase that's supposed to haunt you. That's supposed to make you think, I personally, we all are kind of the heroes of our own story. We're kind of the centers of our own book, right? And we think about our lives, and we think about the places where we have done the hard thing, and maybe the places where we have avoided the hard thing. And we think about, I think we all kind of struggle, depending on who we are, with the concept of privilege. We think about, people who have a lot of money or a lot of power, or, who have kind of were born into those positions as being those with a lot of privilege. And we talk about that from an ethnic, economic, geographic perspective as well, right? I'm a straight, white, married male, and with that, who was born in the United States. So, and I have, come from a family with, parents who were together and were able to provide a stable home and all those things. And all of that comes with a number of privileges. Um, and most people, at least the people who would be watching this, have some piece of that privilege. The fact that you live in a safe place, the fact that you have a half an hour to listen to a pastor talk about a it means that you have some privilege. And so we are all kind of in positions where we can use that spot that we find ourselves in to make someone else's life better, which could put our status at risk. And as we think through that, we think about why we're here. Why are we put into the positions that we are? Why are we in the spots that we are? Is it just to be comfortable? Or is it to do something with that spot to make other people's lives better? And so that's the piece of the story that we're supposed to chew on, that's supposed to haunt us, because it's like, well, am I doing that? Where have I not done that? What is next for me where I could be doing that? Am I encouraging that in other people? Have I avoided it and other people have seen that I avoided it and are judging me for it? It comes with all of those kind of thoughts and feelings. So my gut says that for this sermon, that I'm going to use some of those pieces and hopefully take us through a time where we can kind of consider that actively and intentionally. So that's where I think I'll probably head. Those are the ideas I want you to kind of be mulling over as we go into this next one. Okay, that's about as much time as I have for today. So let me thank you for kind of doing this work with me, thinking about this series, thinking about the players in this book, and I hope that it will continue to kind of make you think in whatever ways that you need to be thinking about things right now. Okay. Thanks for being you. Please, hope you have a wonderful week. Since I'm just catching up on things, if there's something I need to know, please let me know. But other than that, take care, and I will see you next time for another First Look.